Good evening, America, and welcome to ww2, the Jewish American News Channel. This evening, we will be covering the effects World War II had on Jewish Americans. It will be interviewing a Jewish American soldier.
Good evening, America. Most of us already know about the tragedy Jews are facing. This has been going on for quite a while. Once Hitler took over Germany in 1933, the United States was home to more than 4.5 million Jews. Every year, tens of thousands of Jews fled Germany. However, while some countries accepted them, others didn't. We are going to be talking about how Jewish Americans were affected by World War II. Jews were under the shadow of just prejudice and anti-Semitism. Despite the persecution of Jews in Europe, the U.S. government refused to relax its strict immigration limits, basically saying that America didn't care about what the Jews were going through. They still refused to let them in. And anti-Semitism played a part in this decision. In addition, many Americans worried that accepting more refugees will mean added competition for jobs that were already sacred due to the Great Depression. Basically saying that the more Jews, the less jobs, because it's more people the government has to supply jobs to, making things tougher. Once Jewish Americans began to realize this, they decided to protest the government's reluctance to help Jews. More than 400 Jewish rabbis marched in Washington, D.C. However, despite all of this, more Jews served in the military than Americans overall. It is clearly stated that 5,500,000 Jews served in the military. Now let's look at it like this. Albert Einstein was one of the 100,000 Jewish refugees. He helped America by building and creating the atomic bomb before the Nazis did. Now here's an exclusive interview with Justina and our brave Carl Lyon after this public service announcement. Technical difficulties.
Yes. Is there a sound effect we could do?
Technical difficulties.
Okay. Jewish people in America still face anti-Semitism. However, Albert Einstein, who was a Jewish refugee, helped Americans in the war in the Pacific by developing the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb was a bomb that derives its destructive power from rapid release, causing damage through heat, blast, and radioactivity. The U.S. dropped the nuclear weapon in Japanese cities in August 1945. Around 220,000 people were killed when the atomic bomb was dropped on the cities.
Thank you for tuning in to WJAW. Oh my, then come here. No, I'm just standing there.
Because you was
Well, she got it. Oh my God.
Ryan. Fine, and yourself? I'm fine. Today I'm going to ask you a few questions about your experience during World War II. What were your experiences with anti-Semitism in America?
Relatively little. I don't remember any anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. I was very happy to be here. As a matter of fact, one example of that is that once I came here, I didn't want to speak German anymore at all. When my parents came 3 years after I did, I said to them, now look, you're in the United States now, and I'm not going to speak German to you. I'm only going to speak English to you so that you will learn English.
How much did people in America know of what was going on in Europe?
Different at different times. At the beginning, when Germany was making life miserable and impossible for us, economically and socially, this became fairly well known in the United States and people protested here. But at the time, the United States was fairly isolationist. The American people didn't want to get involved in Europe's problems. Later, when the actual Holocaust occurred, it took a while for the news to leak out. Of course, that was wartime. The war started in September 1939, and they, the Nazis, overran Poland, where there was more Jews than there were ever in Germany. From that time on, they did not permit Jews to even leave. Nobody could get out. That is when they instituted their policy of mass murder to get rid of the Jews that way. Now the news about that leaked out very slowly. But there were indications that the Germans were committing mass murder of Jews in the eastern areas in Poland, later on in Western Europe, Russia, and the Soviet Union, and other areas in Europe.
Were you worried on the way to America that you were going to experience anti-Semitism?
No, I didn't think I was worried about that. I was looking forward to being in America. I didn't know much about the discrimination against blacks in America until I got here. Kansas City, Missouri is right on the edge between the North and the South. In fact, during the Civil War, it was on the side of the South. It was a slave state. But then the Union Army fought battle against the Confederate Army and they beat them, and so Missouri became part of the North. Even though it was originally a slave state, there were quite a bit of segregation in Missouri. In Kansas City, there were pretty much segregated areas of the city. Blacks lived in one area, whites lived in another area. In fact, I'm pretty sure that my high school was mostly white, probably practically white, because it was in the right area. I didn't become acquainted with that aspect of American life until I got here.
How did you feel about Americans reluctant to enter the war?
I knew that I know what we Americans were fighting for. That's how I felt about my own army service. I felt that it was necessary, that the German government and the Nazi party were evil, that they were bent on certainly dominating Europe, and they did dominate practically all of Western and Central Europe and far into Eastern Europe. If they had their way, they would have dominated the United States too, even though we were far away from them. But England was lucky that they were never able to invade England. Then after we got into the war, we used England as a staging area for invasion of Europe. No, I felt very strongly that our side was just, that we were just doing service for humanity.
What was your involvement with liberation?
Personally, I was never in any of the camps. I heard later that we got very close to some camps in Alsace-Lorraine. We weren't there. We didn't liberate them. Later in Bavaria, units from my division liberated 6 concentration camps in one town, in the town of Landsberg. Landsberg, by the way, has a prison where Hitler was imprisoned in 1923 from the year after he tried to. It was an abortive try for power at the time. They tried to imprison him. In the prison, he wrote his famous or infamous book, Mein Kampf. That was in Landsberg. My division found 6 concentration camps in around Landsberg, and they liberated them. I wasn't personally in there.
Do you have a final message for the future generations?
It was a war within a war, the war against the Jews. It was simply not the idea that a dictator, Hitler, it was the culmination, the climax of really many centuries of discrimination and hatred against the Jews, which was originally religion-based. Their mythology was so unusual. That's why I said it was a watershed event in history. It was an organized, deliberate, machinized, industrialized method that they used against the Jews. We've never seen that before or since. We have had genocide since World War II. We have seen it in Cambodia. We have seen it in Africa and in other places, but nowhere has it been on that type of scale. Hopefully, future generations will learn that lesson. There's no guarantee, but I hope so.
Thank you, Ms. Caroline, for your time with the interview.
Thank you for tuning into WJAW. Make sure you tune in next time for an exclusive interview with the bravest girl I know. Have a great night and a greater tomorrow.